First Commonwealth Bank. It's AM 1160 WCCS 101.1 FM. I mentioned the Office of Planning and Development. This guy's from the planning side of it, Josh Krug. Good morning.
Good morning, Todd. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you with us. I wanted to talk to you today about a study that got underway earlier this year, the Blighted Properties study, which is basically a survey of the entire county to find out what properties are fallen down and decrepit and are considered blighted. And where do we go with that study? So what's the progress been like?
Yeah, Todd, thank you again for having me. As you'd mentioned, this project began during the fall of 2016, really got going early this year. The Blighted Properties Inventory Project comprised of several overlapping phases. We went from sending the preliminary surveys out, collecting return surveys. We got 8 out of 13 municipalities with return surveys. We're currently working in conjunction with 6 of those municipalities, having received official, permission, so to speak, from the supervisors or borough councils, to come out and do the field work. Mm-hmm. We announced to the public via press release last year that we were going to be coming out and doing the field work. And currently we've completed the data collection in 3 out of the 13 municipalities targeted for this pilot study. Okay. We've completed the work in Ernest Borough, Homer City Borough, and Creekside Borough.
Okay. So having gotten that, were there surprises in that data that you were sort of opened your eyes to things in Indiana County, or pretty much what you expected? Or
the data was not necessarily striking. I can say that plus or minus a few, we've found around 10 properties per each of those municipalities, albeit those are not necessarily the largest municipalities in Indiana County, particularly Ernest and Creekside being relatively smaller. And we also saw a varying degree of severity, as well as different factors that mm-hmm. cause blight. Everything from abandoned properties to overgrown properties to uncompleted construction, deterioration of different degrees, mm-hmm. Garbage and et cetera on different properties. And other things that we noticed were what we call attractive, unprotected nuisance. And, that would be something like an opening or something that a young child or maybe a teenager or anybody, may be inclined to go explore, mm-hmm. so to speak.
Okay. With that information then, I'm sort of wondering about whether these are properties that had dwellings on them, and if there were dwellings, were there people living in them at the time? Could you still be classified as a blighted property even though that property does have an habitation?
Well, yeah, certainly. I suppose that you could be, that the property itself could be considered blighted, with one of those factors that I'd mentioned. But that's not something that we have taken into account at this point as to whether or not the property is occupied. We've basically been doing our initial drive through. Well, I should mention the return surveys. We did supply the municipalities involved in the project with a pretty extensive survey, and we did get response from 8 of those, which provided us with some properties that they had, that based on the information we provided about blight and et cetera, that they provided us a list of addresses that they considered maybe we should take a look at. Mm-hmm. So we started that using that as a baseline. When we went out in the field, we would drive through all of the streets using a map to make sure that we hit every street in the municipality in an initial drive-through, and then we would select out the different properties that we saw maybe ought to be looked at further. And in our more detailed data collection process, we would go out in the field, take a slower drive through, but again, we were not leaving the right of way or entering anybody's property. So we weren't necessarily looking at the habitation of it or not, mm-hmm. But in the tax information that we do have as the county, that there's a classification of whether a property is abandoned or vacant, a vacant lot, so to speak. So we will have that information as we develop the data and do our mapping, but we haven't really looked at it so much yet.
Now, we'll get into the ultimate ambition for the entire project, but what do you do with the set of data that you end up with? When you analyze it and decide, okay, this is what the numbers are telling us, then what happens to it? What actions are demanded, if any?
Well, we haven't determined that quite yet. We've been looking at lots of other municipalities and counties throughout the state of Pennsylvania that have done similar strategies. The term that we found is blight remediation strategies, in the sense that, you know, they're looking at what they deem as blight in their respective area, and they're finding ways to remediate it and target it, and there are ways via property maintenance code that certain municipalities in Indiana County could potentially adopt that they don't currently have. When we start talking about stuff like that, though, the discussion gets into enforcement and other details.
Sure.
And really, we have not gotten to a point where we know exactly where it's going to go. Right now, we're looking at where does blight exist, to what degree, and then we're going to look at the array of strategies and tools that are out there provided to us to look at targeting maybe remediating it or cleaning it up.
So the data collection is complete on 3 of the municipalities.
Yes, it's a slow process.
Working on others.
This is the first semester that we have not had any of our student interns in the student planner program dedicated to this project. We have 3 interns this summer. Typically, we have anywhere from 4 to 7, and we allow our students to select from our project list of current projects in our strategic plan, and we try to align them with projects that they're interested in and that fall in line with what they're looking at doing in the future beyond school here.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that this semester there's nobody dedicated to the project, but we are continuing to collect data this summer. Myself and one of the students who is in the role of assistant planner is going to we're going to go out and try to get at least a 4th or a 5th done this summer. So it's been a slow and steady process.
Ultimately, you want to get into every municipality in Indiana County, but that would take a matter of years, wouldn't it?
It certainly would take a matter of years. And in working with the Redevelopment Authority and the Housing and Community Development section within the Office of Planning and Development, we've targeted 13 of the 38 municipalities as a pilot for this study. We want to see how this goes and how long it takes, and those types of things. And as you mentioned, we would like to get to, of course, all 38 municipalities at some point and collect the data and produce the mapping.
How did this whole idea come to light, and how was it is actually pushed forward as something that would be valuable for the county to do?
Well, Todd, thank you for asking that. In 2014, the fall of 2014, Indiana County adopted a housing plan, and that's an addendum to the Indiana County Comprehensive Plan that was adopted in September of 2012. And there's several strategies, or I guess the overhauling goal of the housing plan is to ensure a safe and healthy built environment and assisting in the preservation of sound existing housing and the improvement of neighborhoods and communities. So that being the overhauling goal, in the different categories that the plan looks at of housing availability, housing quality, and some other things, there are objectives that really brought this property on, or this Blighted Properties inventory project about. One being, to continue to support the preservation and maintenance of the existing housing inventory, particularly for households with lower incomes. Another objective in housing quality, to create a mechanism by which municipalities can acquire and demolish dilapidated properties for the specific intent of infill residential development. That's a very specific objective. Yeah. And that gets to kind of what I alluded to before in terms of the details and the discussions that would need to have to get to the implementation of something like that. But these are things that as I mentioned before, we've seen throughout the state and the country, done to tackle blight. And again, blight is different. It's hard to define clearly. It's different depending on where you are. In my research, I've seen communities refer to a neighborhood as blighted because they don't have two-car garages.
Oh, okay.
So it's relative.
It certainly is. My goodness. We're with Josh Krug from the Indiana County Office of Planning and Development. The Blighted Properties survey is ongoing and will be for quite some time. This might not be a particularly, well, let's put it this way. This might not be an aim of the survey or any of that thing. But talk a little bit, if you would, about when a property is abandoned and the property owner formally gives up the ownership of that. Does the county then take possession of that apart from liens from lien holders?
Yeah, I think somebody from the sheriff's office or the tax assessment office could probably speak to this a little better than myself, but I am relatively keen on the process. There's a repository of properties that are in that situation that you just described, and they go up for sheriff's sale, and typically what happens is these properties end up in a cycle of being bought by somebody, maybe not cared for, and then end up with liens on them and those types of things, and then get back into the same situation of being in a sheriff's sale or eventually, as you mentioned, abandoned completely and then owned by the county. At that point, we're losing tax base and there's different strategies and tools that are out there, as I've been referring to. One of those being a tool called land banking. Just some of the basics of it, the purpose being to acquire vacant, tax delinquent properties and return them to productive use. It's a tool and a government entity, locally created and controlled. And there's an entire structure that's developed by the state. If you are to look to as a municipality or a county to implement something like a land bank. So again, that's one of those things that as we get a clearer picture of what blight looks like here in Indiana County, then we can start to look at the array of tools and strategies that are out there to remediate it.
Just a couple of moments left with Josh Krug from the Indiana County Office of Planning and Development. Can folks expect to see the survey going on in different communities next? Where are we going next with this?
Yeah, Todd. As I mentioned, there's 13 out of the 38 so far. I can run through them very, very briefly. Most of them being boroughs, but we are in 3 townships currently. That being Burrell Township, White Township, and Center Township. More of the urban townships, more developed townships. They were selected for this pilot study. And then we are also in Indiana Borough, Homer City Borough, Blairsville, Salzburg, Armaugh. We're in Creekside, Ernest, Plumville, Smicksburg, and Clymer. And we have not selected, who we may target next, but as we'd mentioned, we are looking to get to all 38, of course, here in the county.
Thanks, Josh. We appreciate it. AM 1160 WCCS, 101.1 FM.